It's now time to add our JavaScript to our project. So over in our text editor, let's create a new file in the root of our project called script.js. We can go over to our index page and link this at the bottom, just above the closing body tag. So the script and the source is going to be equal to our script.js. So the first thing we want to do when the game loads is to generate a random number, which is between 1 and 100. And we can trigger a function as soon as the browser loads up this document by adding a onload event handler to the body tag. So as soon as the page has loaded, we can trigger a function, and I'm going to call this init. So this is effectively initializing our game as soon as the browser loads. Over to our script.js, we can now create a variable to store this value inside. So I'm going to call this the computer guess. And I've declared this outside of a function, so it's available to use in any other function. If we were to declare this inside of a function, this variable would be scoped to that particular function, meaning we couldn't access it in any other parts of our program. So let's create our function, which is going to be our init function, and this doesn't take in any parameters. And then we need to set our computer guess to be equal to our random number. So we can do this by selecting math.random, which will select a number between 0 and 1. We want this to be between 1 and 100, so therefore we can multiply this by 100. And this will now leave us with a random number which begins with a 0 all the way through to 99. However, we want this to be between 1 and 100, so we can add 1 onto the end. We also need this to be rounded, so we can round this with math.floor. So let's cut this out of place, and we can make use of the math.floor method, and then pass in our number. And this will round down each one of our numbers, so we have a number between 1 and 100. Let's test this is working. We can log the computer guess. And this should load up each time the browser begins. Now we've got an error, so init. We just need to make sure this is spelled correctly. And now each time we reload the browser, we get a random number. So we can see this inside the console. So this is a good start for our project. And the next thing we need to do is to show and hide some elements on the screen. So when this page first loads up, we don't need to see the new game button. This is just going to be there at the very end of our game. So let's remove this and select our document by the ID. And the ID which we want to select is the new game button, which we can see just here. And we can remove this by setting the CSS style property of display to be equal to a string value of none. So our button is now removed as soon as the game loads up, and we also want to remove this game area too. So let's duplicate this, but this time the ID which we want to select is going to be equal to this game area. So you may be thinking, why not just hide the game area, which also includes the button? Well, this is because later on in the game, once it's finished, we still need to keep this game area in place, but we are going to reinstate the button. And the ID which we want to select is the game area, which now leaves us with the start screen. Good, we've now got a random number, we're now hiding the game area. Next we need to create a function to actually start the game. This is going to involve hiding this welcome screen, and then showing the game area which we've just removed, which will effectively give us two screens. So to do this, we'll create a function, and I'm going to call this the start game view. So once the game has started, we want to remove or hide this area. And if we go back to our index page, this area has the ID of welcome screen. So document.getElement by ID. We want to select the welcome screen. And just like above, we'll make use of the style property of display and set this equal to none. Duplicate this line, and the next thing we need to do is to reinstate the game area, which we've hid just above. So change this to be game area. And to make this appear on the screen, we need to change the display type to be block. Next, we need a way to actually call this function once the game starts. Well, the way we're going to do this is by using our easy and the hard buttons. For now, both of these buttons are just simply going to call this same function, but we'll change it later on so the user only has 5 or 10 attempts. So let's create our functions. Our first function is going to be for the easy mode. And then our second function is going to be for the hard mode. And all these will do is just call our start game view function. So we can add these into both of these functions. Now to call these functions, we do this in our index page. Let's go to our buttons, and we'll add a on-click event handler. The function which we want to call once the button has been clicked is easy mode. And the second button is going to trigger the hard mode function. So we should now be able to play this game inside the browser. Let's click on easy. This now hides the welcome screen and shows the game area. Reload this, try the hard button, and this also takes us to the game section 2. Now we have a way to begin our game. In the next video, we're going to move on to capturing the user's input and also comparing this with our random number.